Yo, what's up everybody, it's Tuna. In today's video I wanted to show you guys my Lightning Strike Pathfinder poison build. It is a very strong build. It can face tank pretty much all Ubers and utilizes the Mahuk Subtle Shield, which is my favorite unique in the game. It is absolutely insane. I always try to make builds around it because yeah, it's just really fun to build around. And it might be very confusing looking at it at first glance, but I'll just give you a TLDR real quick. So it gives you a bunch of keystones, and these keystones are actually going to modify and interact with your character in specific ways, and you can utilize these keystones as well to pretty much leverage defenses in your favor and make it pretty much insane, right? So the TLDR is you're going to be getting 5% all resistance, including chaos, once your energy shield is filled. You can see that you can start at 0, but your life leech also applies to energy shield. So basically you're going to be getting over leech as well as energy shield leech. And with the use of the instant leech mastery, we're going to be able to transfer, basically 10% of that leech into energy shield leech, making it so that you actually are filling up your energy shield very, very quickly, which I'll show right here. You see that we've already filled our energy shield, and now we're at 90 max resistance. And then it goes down because you have to actually fill that up once every 4 seconds, but as long as you're hitting a target, even on single target, that 10% is going to be plenty because the shield also grants Val Pact. What Val Pact does is it doubles, it basically doubles your life leech, right? But it also makes you have no regeneration. You think to yourself, that's kind of annoying. No regeneration is pretty bad, right? Like in situations where you are degenning like this, you want to have regeneration, but there is a keystone on here as well called Eternal Youth that you'll see here once I onslaught Blood Rage, and it makes my energy shield recharge apply to my life. So if you stop taking damage for a couple seconds, that will basically shoot back up. Of course, like if you have Blood Rage going, then it won't stop, so you might actually want to stop your Blood Rage or potentially put that in your shield or something like that, so you can weapon swap to essentially kill it. But for me so far, there hasn't been any issues whatsoever with that. Next, there is Corrupted Soul, and Corrupted Soul is going to give us 50% of non-chaos damage, which bypasses energy shield, and 15% maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. This doesn't really matter all that much as we are actually not taking any damage to our energy shield. Our energy shield is going to be pretty much useless. It's just going to be there as a buffer for us getting our 5% maximum resistance. The important thing here is Divine Flesh. Divine Flesh is basically what enables this character's defenses, and it makes 50% of elemental damage taken as chaos damage, as well as giving us a 5% max chaos res. So with this, as well as the other keystone, we're going to be getting a 10% maximum chaos resistance, which puts us at 85. And later on, we can actually boost that higher. As we can show here, we can get a new tattoo. And this tattoo is absolutely insane because it has to have 8 adjacent passives. But since we are also able to turn our keystones into, whatever, we are going to be able to click 8 nodes here. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we have 8 adjacent. We get 4 all maximum resistance with the help of the Warrior's Tail here. So you can see it's 2 and that's turned into 4. And we get 1 max chaos rest there. So that turns... that essentially makes us have 85 and an additional 5 once we hit enemies and we fill our energy shield, making us have 90 chaos resistance, which is insane, right? That is our chaos resistance, and you think to yourself, okay, but now we are taking 50% of non-chaos damage to chaos, and we are also taking the rest to our other resistances, and how do we mitigate that? And that is through Tempered by War. So we're going to make it so that we take 50% of our lightning damage taken as fire damage. What essentially means that is you're splitting the elemental damage you take between chaos and fire. So what you want to do is you only want to have fire resistance as well as chaos resistance, and you want to boost your maximum resistances as high as possible. The way that we do that is through the use of Purity of Fire, which is somewhere here, Purity of Fire, and we want to have that as high level as possible because it's going to give us additional fire resistance depending on the level. You see that it's giving me 4. When I put in the gloves with +2, it's 5. And of course, these gloves availability is probably going to be very low. So you might have 1 less maximum fire resistance, but that is not that big of a deal. But essentially, it's going to give us 5. And then we want to get the rest, of course, through getting, you see here, I have non-cursed auras from your skills. I get 2 of those, as well as 10% effective auras. And that gets us to the point where we have 90 maximum fire resistance, when that's enabled, of course. So we are basically taking no damage from those 2 elements because they're at 90 max, so we're reducing a ton of that incoming. So the next problem is going to be, how do we mitigate physical damage? Because we are actually taking physical damage in full force. So far, we have done a very good job at mitigating all the elemental damage we take by splitting it to both fire and chaos resistance and getting that maximum resistance up as much as possible. How do we mitigate physical damage? And that's through the use of the Cloak of Flame. It's called a robe. This unique is very underrated, very strong. It makes us take 40% of physical damage as fire damage. And you can get some pretty cheap corruptions on this. You know, percent increased damage is really good since we're pretty starved as a poison build. You can take reduced chaos or reduced fire damage taken, or basically any other implicit that is going to benefit you. Make sure you import that into PoB and check out whether it's actually good for your build. Yeah, check that out that way. So that's 40% there. And then we can take 8% on the implicit here and 8% on the explicit. That is going to be 16% there. And then we want to get an additional 10% here on the Watcher's Eye if possible. I divide mine to 8% because I also have a grace modifier on there to give me 8% max evasion. Although that is obviously not mandatory. It's just a good extra bit of defense that I can get for my character since we're going to be very near evasion cap with this as well. And the rest we are actually going to be getting from a Lethal Pride. Now, these jewels are not very available, of course, and you're going to have to like take a look at whether you can get a good one with 2 or 3, or in some cases even 4. But if you could see here, if I type physical, I have a 5%, 5%, 5%, and of course, another 5%, which is 20% physical damage taken as, which is crazy, right? So that gets me to the point where I'm almost taking no physical damage at all. And one thing to check out as well is that you can also put the jewel here. You do not necessarily have to put it here. So yeah, you can swap between those two, and you can, of course, use the Path of Building search tool to see whether like your jewel is going to give you physical damage taken as. But yeah, the main purpose of this is to provide you, of course, with flat strength as well as physical damage taken as. So since we are only taking fire and physical damage on this build and chaos damage, we can actually use anomalous Arctic armor or Arctic armor to its fullest because we are taking less fire damage from hits while stationary and less physical damage from hits while stationary. Since we are shifting so much of that physical damage to other elements, but we are first reducing it, that is going to give us an additional lot of damage reduction. And since we are taking less fire damage as well as having, you know, all that maximum resistance, you know, you're going to have like so much damage reduction from Arctic armor. It is extreme value for this build. It's absolutely insane. So since you are lightning strike, you're going to be stationary pretty much all the time when you attack. As you can see here, like, you know, you're just basically standing still when you attack and you're going to be getting that damage reduction there. That is completely crazy, right? If I look into PoB, Arctic armor is actually going to be giving me, you know, it's going to give me like 10% of my total max hit in general and 20% for physical. That's just crazy, right? 20% phys mitigation as well as 10% elemental and 14% total. For just a little bit of, you know, reservation. I like anomalous. Of course, you can go for the normal or default. But yeah, anomalous is nice because it gives you a 20% chance to freeze enemies when they attack you. In cases where you are getting shotgunned or something like that, the enemy is going to have a 20% chance to be frozen. That is a nice extra little bit of defensive layer. Next, I wanted to talk about the belt, and the belt is going to be, of course, the Darkness Enthroned, because the Darkness Enthroned is absolutely insane, since we are, of course, going to be poisoning with elemental damage through the use of the Pneumatic Dagger, or at very high budgets with Original Sin. We can stack elemental damage to attacks on Bistruals, and, you know, it's pretty insane. Like, we can get a ton of elemental damage to our claw attacks by using, you know, the Path of Building jewel search tool. It's going to give us a ton of damage. So each of these jewels is like 8% when I slot it into my belt. So that's like, you know, it's going to be like 16 to 30% even if you have like other jewels that are even better than mine. Mine are not that insane. If I look into PoB here, my Darkness Enthroned jewels, it's going to give me about like 10% damage, as well as the attributes that I need to, you know, fix my build essentially, because my build is actually quite attribute starved at the moment. Since tattoos are that good that we want to be replacing our tree with tattoos and then replacing our attributes in one way or another. The Darkness Enthroned is pretty crazy. It's definitely one to look out for. However, the build, since it's a Pathfinder, you can use any belt you want as long as it has attributes on it, because we are pretty attribute starved. You can see everything bricks once I take it off. But yeah, you need a belt. You can also use Headhunter if you want for mapping. But yeah, Darkness Enthroned is definitely like the best choice here, and especially if you can get 2 really good jewels. But yeah, you can basically even use a Stygian or anything of the sort. Next, the amulet. So the amulet is a pretty free slot as well. I chose to go for the Strangle Grasp because it's kind of a fun item and you can corrupt it, and corrupting it can have pretty cool outcomes, such as it going to a rare item, and then you can eventually roll a rare item with you know, tainted currency and that kind of stuff. But I corrupted 3 of them and I didn't get anything good, so yeah, I mean, I'm stuck with a corrupted one with the anointments that I want. So you might think to yourself, yo, this amulet is actually very expensive. You know, last I checked, it was about 20 divines, non-corrupted. That is very expensive, right? But people are selling the corrupted ones for very cheap. When I looked at it, they were like 3 divines for a corrupted one. That's because people want to gamble, right? So what you can do is you can buy the corrupted ones, you put them inside of the bench, and you can remove enchantments, right? And you can remove enchantments, making the amulet basically a free slate for you to anoint on. The only cost that you accrue from there, right? So you can see here, remove enchantment, and that's going to cost one of those like tainted currencies that you get from laboratory. Yeah, you can remove enchantment that way. The only additional cost to anoint is that you're going to be needing tainted oils for every anoint that you put in thereafter. So you see that I put it here, it's going to ask me for a tainted oil as well, but that is going to cost a substantial amount less in comparison to if you were to actually buy one uncorrupted. But the alternative to this amulet as well is the Ulnitol's Vow, which actually turns out to be more damage than this amulet. However, I am kind of reluctant to put very rare items into my PoBs. I'm scared that you guys might actually buy them out and they become very expensive and people get pissed off. It is not mandatory. You can basically use any amulet here. I just very much like this one. Another one that you can use is the Eternal Struggle amulet of additional defenses, as well as Culling Strike and all that kind of stuff. And that is a very good amulet as well. And you can have it with other implicits, for example, like Eldritch implicits like Dot Multi, Curse Effect, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the amulet slot. It's pretty flexy and you can do whatever. For the helmet, you definitely want the Lightning Strike additional projectile enchant. And here you're going to have to fit your suppression as well, since we need at least 2 pieces with suppression T1, right? That is because we can't fit it on our chest, our gloves, or our shield. You need 2 T1 rolls. That is going to have to be on your helmet and on your boots. And your boots is going to have to be rolled with Void Ailment essences. So you're going to have to craft 2 items. Crafting these items is going to be relatively expensive because of the fact that you'll have to use loathing essences. And loathing essences are not exactly cheap. However, hitting these suffixes is not incredibly difficult. At this point in the league, I think most people should be able to afford it if they're looking to make a build like this. But essentially, yeah, you want to look for those 2 suffixes. There are other ways to cap your suppression. That is, by getting a double Watcher's Eye with, instead of Evade Chance by Grace here, you can get a suppression by Grace as well. So you can actually suppress damage with Purifier. And yeah, but the most important thing is to keep the Purifier Fist taken as. That's going to give you the highest amount of physical damage taken as and max fist hit. So what does the PoB look like? This is the budget variant, or well, budget, so it's going to be the cheaper variant without using the original Sin, of course, because that's about 60 divines. And we actually end up about 14 million poison DPS. And I want to kind of explain why I've also gone through the configuration here and added some stats. You can see maximum resistance is going to be 5%, and that's because of the Eternal Sacrifice that I've explained earlier. Once your energy shield fills up, you get 5% max. And the other one is 60% more damage. And you think to yourself, why would you have that? That is because we are using a returning projectile from Lightning Strike. So if I click here, we're using returning projectile, which is actually not supported by PoB. You can see my damage is not changing at all. And yeah, returning projectile has 100% chance to return once, and then it has a 20% chance to return an additional time, which is even better than most people think. So if we shoot our projectiles, you see that we have a total of I think it should be 8 projectiles. Yeah, 8 projectiles, and each of those projectiles has a 20% chance to return. And if we know how projectile skills work, is you can only hit with one of those projectiles per instance, right? So if you have 8 projectiles, only one of those projectiles can hit. Every time they return, that chance resets. Essentially what happens is that you can hit once, and when they return, you hit a second time. And when they return again, you can technically hit a third time, right? As long as they return. And you can see that the chances of it returning are pretty much 100% as long as you have, if you had 10 projectiles, it would be 100%, basically a 20% chance for them to return. So you're going to have a very, very high chance for them to return. You can see sometimes you get unlucky, but yeah, they will pretty much always return. And so we calculate that by thinking that our projectiles are dealing 50% of our total damage, and then they return, so we are doubling that damage. So we essentially get 100% more projectile damage, but then they are actually returning an additional time. So then you could have 100% more additional to that. But I only put an extra little bit. So I put like 120% more projectile damage. Or I don't want to say projectile damage because that's not the wording in game, but it's 120% more damage with your projectiles, essentially, which I would say is 60% more damage, since we have to split that in half, as it's 50% of our total damage. This mechanic is pretty insane, and the reason behind it is because the wording on the skill gem specifically states projectiles from supported skills deal 61% less damage while returning. But The way that it's worded, it says projectiles from supported skills deal, right? Which means this is projectile damage. And if you were to type here in PoB 61% less projectile damage, you can see that our average hit goes down, but our poison does not, because projectile damage does not actually modify poison damage, right? You can type it again, 61% less projectile damage. Yeah, our poison damage goes up a little bit. It goes down a little bit just because of our average hit, because, you know, our average hit is still going to be a little bit of our total damage. You see that it's very negligible, right? It's almost nothing in comparison to what we gain. So yeah, returning projectile is really good. On top of the fact that it's gonna like basically help you clear a bunch more. It's just really, really nice. It's a very good support gem for poison skills and poison projectiles. Definitely do not sleep on that one. It is very, very, very good. Now, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about the snake pit as well. The most important corruption here is going to be the temporal chains corruption. However, you can also get a corruption for despair, since we are neither using despair nor temporal chains in our links otherwise. So yeah, you can look for temporal chains or despair. If you are going for the original sin variant of this build, of course you want to be using temporal chains, as you won't be able to like reduce the resistances further unless you have penetration. So if we type here despair on hit, first enemies with despair on hit, you can see that our damage goes from 11.8 million to about 10.8. So it's a small loss, but it's going to be more upfront damage, as you know how temporal chains works. It basically increases the duration of your poisons. And also temporal chains is completely cracked, because it does not actually give you more or less damage depending on what level the gem is. And the gloves actually have a level 1 cursed skill gem on them. And the rest of the gear is just basically going to be a little bit of placeholder stuff, like the rings is going to be elemental damage, chaos resistance, as well as some accuracy. On the pneumatic dagger variant, you do want accuracy, because we are actually crafting the dagger with a hunter's exalted orb. And that is just the easiest way to craft it. And I'll actually show how you can craft it right now. So to craft our pneumatic dagger, it is quite simple. You want to use either a hatred, a wrath, or an anger, I believe. Yeah, or an anger essence. And that's because it's going to give you flat elemental damage. And what you want to do is you want to keep rolling until you have flat elemental damage roll from the essence, as well as a secondary T1 or T2 elemental damage prefix that can either be fire, lightning, or cold, depending on what essence you used. In this case, we'll just input, fire. And one thing to note is that the physical damage or chaos damage are both not really good. They're going to be a much lower damage in comparison to an elemental damage roll. So yeah, keep that in mind. And probably at this point of the craft, you're going to either have a prefix, which is very unlucky because that means that you might have to annul, or a suffix, right? So imagine you have a couple suffixes here. At this point, then you would craft prefixes cannot be changed, which is a suffix craft. There you go. Prefixes cannot be changed, and you scour, so you have your two prefixes. But imagine you had a prefix on there, and the prefix was not an attack modifier. Imagine you had like +1 in socketed gems or something like that. You can see that it does not have an attack tag. This is what we're looking for. Then what you can do is you can craft cannot roll attack modifiers, and then you can annul it down for a safe annul. Of course, you can annul the crafted mod since it does not have an attack tag. Yeah, you can see that it's a safe annul because it cannot annul down anything that has an attack tag on it. And then at this point, you would go prefix cannot be changed, and you scour it down. So the scope is to get two prefixes. Going to be 2 flat elemental damage rolls, cold or fire. And then from here you can proceed. And the next step would be to roll, so you definitely want to have your suffixes full. So in a situation where you have 2 suffixes and 1 prefix, this is kind of crazy because I ended up rolling chaos.multi. So at this point, I think the dagger is like kind of insane, but yeah, imagine like you don't have that, right? And you have 2 suffixes and 2 prefixes. You do not actually have to scour down before doing the next step, since you want to craft cannot roll attack modifiers, and then you would slam a Hunter's Exalted Orb. And that's because the Hunter's Exalted Orb has now a 100% chance to slam chaos damage over time. You can see here, and that can be any varying tier. And it seems that I only rolled T4, but yeah. Okay, so imagine like you drop that, so that's chaos damage over time. That's perfect. So you have your 2 prefixes and chaos damage over time. If you did have these crazy ass suffixes, you would just craft, you know, attack speed from here and be done with. Because getting Chaos Stealth multi is just absolutely insane. But in most situations, you won't have that, so you will have to go for prefixes cannot be changed and scour that down to just these 3 prefixes. And you go, can have crafted 3 crafted modifiers. You craft attack speed and damage over time multiplier. Chaos damage over time multiplier. Perfect. And that is your dagger. That is done. There is a way to actually get a veiled suffix on this, since that's the gold prefix cannot be changed and, you know, ashling, but I don't recommend it, as getting chaos damage over time multiplier or attack speed is going to be a gamble, and the values on those is pretty close to what you can craft. So yeah, just go ahead and craft can have 3 multi, you know, multi-mod and these 2 modifiers on there. That is how you will craft your pneumatic dagger. It is a very easy craft, since it's pretty deterministic, aside from the fact that you can get pretty unlucky with your essences or having a filled prefix that you have to annul. But aside for that, you know, it's deterministic and fairly easy. Yeah, at this point, you would just get this to 30% quality, you know, with Betrayal. You would put the Harvest enchant of quality does not affect physical damage, rather it affects the attack speed. You want to have more attack speed on this, of course. That is the dagger that I've inputted here into the PoB. You can see that this is going to be the end result, and this dagger is going to allow you to have all damage from hits with this weapon can poison, that you do not need original sin or anything like that to actually deal poison damage. Yeah, that pretty much sums up the dagger. I just want to go over everything to make sure that I've not missed anything. So the TLDR for the itemization is going to be a pneumatic dagger, of course. The Mahug Subtle, which is the centerpiece of the build, getting as much physical damage taken as on the helmet, as well as T1 suppression roll and mana reservation efficiency of skills, which is crafted with the loathing essence. Next, we're going to get a Cloak of Flame with a corruption. These are very cheap. You can get a single corruption. Those good corruptions can be percent increased damage, reduced fire damage taken, reduced chaos damage taken. Just make sure to avoid the percent increased life or any sort of life modifiers, since you will want to use the mastery that gives you 15% life if no life modifiers are present on your body armor. Next, for the snake pits or snake bites, you want to have, at the very least, Temporal Chains or Despair. This is mandatory. You need this for your additional curse. It's a crazy amount of damage. Yeah, you want your snake bites here with the corrupted curse. Ideally, you want Temporal Chains. The second best is going to be Despair. For your boots, you're going to want to have Chaos Resistance as well as Suppression on there. So make sure that you grab a Chaos Resistant Fracture. Do not grab a Suppressed Fracture, because it is much harder for you to roll Chaos Resistance than it is to roll Suppression. And Suppression, even if you have a T2 modifier on this, you can actually solve that by getting a couple of extra tattoos. You know, giving up a little bit of projectile speed on the tattoos is not a problem, whereas giving up some Suppression or Chaos Resistance can become a little bit of a problem. So yeah, make sure to get the Chaos Resistance fractured on there. Craft your boots that way. With the implicits, you definitely want to avoid ailments. You can do this with a lesser ichor, because you're going to have 32% or 30% plus avoid on the suffix. That's with the loathing essence as well. So yeah. Next, for the amulet, as we previously mentioned, you can go for the Strangle Grasp. This is going to be anointed with you know, various modifiers, and you can always check which modifier is best for your build by going into the path of building, clicking on the amulet here. For example, Strangle Grasp, you click anoint 4. You sort by full DPS. It's going to tell you which ones give you the most damage. However, make sure that some of them look better than they are. Like, for example, Marked for Death is going to be very good for single target, as it's going to cull things that are marked. However, I think for mapping, it's inconsistent, since, you know, you're going to want to be getting that damage for mapping as well. And Panopticon only gives you damage when your totem is down. I also think that these two are not exactly like the best. Then I would look at the next ones down the list, of course. That sums up the Strangle Grasp. But you can also keep in mind that you can use an Olnatol's Vow, and you always want to have Whispers of Doom anointed. That is the most important thing there. If you have an Olnatol's Vow, to check the damage for that is you input it here. You're going to see you lose a little bit of damage, but since you now have an additional link that you can slot into there, you can put that, you know, over here, like Deadly Ailments or Elemental Damage with attacks or whatever. See that the damage goes up actually quite substantially, but so does your mana cost, so keep that in mind. You might want to put an Inspiration or something like that. And now that I'm here, one more thing to mention is that people like Multi-Strike. I don't like Multi-Strike. Multi-Strike is a lot of damage though. It's very, very good. The reason why I don't use Multi-Strike is that Multi-Strike actually does not give you additional damage for your Val Lightning Strike, right? Because it only affects it only affects your actual strikes. And Val Lightning Strike is not technically your strike. So it doesn't repeat your Val Lightning Strikes. Because this build is based around returning projectile as well, your Val Lightning Strike is going to be dealing basically 100% more damage because it's basically only projectile damage, right? Your Val Lightning Strike is going to be a huge portion of your damage, which is actually not calculated in the total here. And yeah, I would like for my support gems to support all types of damage that I deal rather than just like portions of it. So that is why I don't like multi-strike, and that is also the reason why I think multi-strike is inefficient. However, if you are doing just bossing, you know, if you want to take on a uber boss or something like that, multi-strike is completely fine. Or if you do like the way it feels, I personally don't really like it, but yeah, you can put multi-strike in there. That's totally up to you. And for rings, you want to fit, you know, life, chaos resistance, as well as elemental damage with attack skills. Accuracy is going to be very important if you are not using the claw variant. So make sure you get accuracy on there. Belt, you can go Darkness Enthroned, Headhunter, or a rare belt. None of that will matter. You know, you can get basically anything you want. And if you get Darkness Enthroned, make sure that you look for jewels here with the tool. I have a video on how to look for jewels, so yeah, check that out. Your flask is very important to get good flasks. You know, put quality on your flask. You are Pathfinder. You need your flasks to last 100% of the time, if possible. The most important thing they need to worry about is your ruby flask needs to be up all the time. The rest of your flasks are going to have maybe some downtime here and there, but your ruby flask has to have 100% uptime. Overflowing chalice is going to help that a little bit, but having progenesis, if you can afford it, gives you a massive bump in survivability. So that is one of those upgrades that you will look for very early on in the build. Yeah, definitely check that out. And the best implicit that you can get on flask is going to be increased charge recovery or reduced charges per use. So that is the two ones that you will look for. The alchemist or perpetual are the best prefixes, and then the suffixes, you're going to want movement speed, attack speed, increased evasion during effect, or reduced curse effect during effect. So you're going to get like a bunch of reduced curse effect, attack speed, evasion, you know, that all that good stuff. Jewels, you know, your cluster jewel is pretty flexible, but we like going for you know, the conditional leech ones as well as martial prowess. It's going to help us with our accuracy here. And the conditional leech ones, because you're going to be getting increased damage while leeching and increased attack speed while leeching. We are always leeching because we have Slayer over leech essentially with our shield. But these are going to be non-conditional, always up as long as we're attacking things. And as long as we're not in no leech maps. Then we want a warrior's tail to increase the tattoos within the radius here. The tattoos in the radius are going to have to be 2 increased effect aura ones, as well as the tattoo of the Makanga, which is going to give you 2 maximum resistance for sure is the best. And you can also get a loyalty tattoo. I really like this one here, the loyal tattoo of Rakiata, because what it does is when you hit a unique enemy, it's going to spawn this mob that gives you 20% action speed. And so that's essentially just 20% more damage for a duration when you hit a unique enemy, which is going to be, you know, when you're dealing with a tanky target like a map boss, or if you're doing Delirium, you know, if one of the Deli bosses spawns, or a boss. So yeah, the tattoo of Rakiata is pretty good. Make sure to have one of those as possible. So since it's going to be like, the increased effect is going to be like maximum efficiency because you have many tattoos of that same tribe. And then you want to fit as many increased flash duration tattoos as possible. Make sure that you are getting as much flash duration as possible, of course. Let's take a look at the very end game version of this, which is going to be using the original sin. So the original sin is kind of cracked because it basically sets enemy resistances to 0 and it lets us use claws instead of daggers. You're going to see that we get a bunch more damage, but our survivability stays about the same. So you're going to be getting a lot more damage if you go for an original sin, but your survivability is going to be the same. So this is kind of a way for you to aspire to build your build into something bigger. You know, if you're looking for a chase build, something that you can keep upgrading, and maybe something that doesn't use Mage Blood since it's so expensive this league, this is a good project to have. So the itemization is going to be pretty much exactly the same, aside for the fact that we are now using a claw with hits can't be evaded. And yeah, it's going to have like a T1 attack speed, 2 elemental damage, and then you multi-mod, hits can be evaded in chaos.multi. The rest of the items are going to be the same helmet, Cloak of Flame, Snake Bite with, you know, if you can get +2 aura skills, this is going to give you 1 additional fire max resistance, so it's going to take you to 90 instead of to 89, which is, you know, kind of good, but yeah. Then Strangle Grasp, or again for an All's Uprising, that is totally up to you. Remember, All's Uprising actually does more damage, but yeah, it's not as fun because you can't corrupt it, right? But yeah, I'm not at the point yet where I have a corrupted one. And then since you don't need accuracy on your rings, you can just get like more damage stats. I ended up getting recoup because there's actually no good suffixes, but a good suffix to have here is going to be like attributes. You see that I'm actually starving on attributes, so maybe getting all attributes, roll, or strength, or dex is going to be pretty good to have on the ring. And then Darkness and Throne with Abyss Jewels or Headhunter. You know, I'm using Headhunter for maps. It's kind of fun. And it's kind of nice to have a build that is not reliant on Mage Blood. You know, it doesn't fall apart when you don't use Mage Blood. So yeah. And then the flasks are going to be the same, aside for the Progenesis, of course, and small upgrades here and there. Yeah, I'll have both the PoBs in the description. Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is like one of my favorite builds in the game at the moment. I think it's one of the strongest builds in the game. I can basically face tank everything. As long as you don't roll penetration or, you know, fizz damage as extra, like you can pretty much do Ubers and face tank everything that they do. I hope you enjoyed this video. I talked a lot about the mechanics and the build and stuff like that. If you want to ask me more questions, come by the stream. Hope you guys enjoyed this build, and yeah, I hope you guys actually make this because in my opinion it's one of the best builds in the game. Thank you for watching, everybody. I appreciate it, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Peace out.